Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're plunging into, well, a really pivotal moment in U.S. history, what truly sparked the American Revolution.
Right. Our mission today is taking this pile of sources, historical accounts, research, articles, and pulling out the key insights for you.
Exactly. Sort of a shortcut to getting properly informed on this foundational period.
Because most people, they think Boston Tea Party, redcoats, maybe no taxation without representation, and yeah, those are important.
Crucial, absolutely.
But what our sources really show is something a bit more complex. The real spark wasn't just one moment. It was more of a slow burn, wasn't it? A gradual shift, this whole redefinition of the relationship between the colonies and Britain.
Fueled by taxes, big ideas, and yeah, definitely a lot of tea.
It's really the story of how these colonies went from seeing themselves as British subjects to, well, something entirely new, citizens of a new country.
Okay, let's set the scene for you then. Picture the early 1700s. You've got these 13 colonies, technically under British rule.
Technically, yes.
But they are absolutely booming, growing fast, economy, culture, population, just really dynamic places.
Yeah, and what's interesting and sometimes missed is that even with all that growth, most people there still thought of themselves as British loyal subjects. But as they grew, so did this desire for, let's say, more independence in how they ran their own affairs, especially locally. They had kind of gotten used to managing things themselves.
Okay, that's a key point. So you've got these colonies getting used to self-governance, and then there's Britain. And our sources show Britain was, well, financially strained. Wars like the French and Indian War cost a lot of money.
A huge amount. And from London's perspective, it seemed fair. We protected you, helped you expand. Now it's time to help pay the bills.
Which makes sense from their side, but it immediately sets up this clash, doesn't it? Different expectations.
Absolutely. That financial pressure really triggered a change in how Britain dealt with the colonies. For years, it was this policy of salutary neglect, kind of benignly ignoring them, letting them manage themselves.
Right. Hands off.
Exactly. But now, after the war, Britain started seeing the colonies differently, not just as part of the empire, but as a source of direct revenue, money to fill the treasury.
And that's where the trouble really starts, that shift in perspective.
That's the underlying tension that's about to explode.
So what's the fastest way to make people angry about this shift? Taxes. New taxes.
Yep.
And the sources really highlight the Stamp Act, 1765, as a massive turning point, not just another tax.
No, definitely not. This thing required a paid stamp on basically every piece of printed paper. Legal documents, newspapers, calendars.
Even playing cards, right? Imagine that.
Yeah. And the colonists were furious. Why this one specifically?
Well, it wasn't just the cost, was it?
No. It was an internal tax levied directly on stuff happening inside the colonies, and the colonists felt, hang on, our elected assemblies handle internal taxes. Parliament can't just step in and do this.
Because they had no representatives in that parliament deciding these taxes.
Exactly. No voice. And that's where you get that really powerful slogan, no taxation without representation. It wasn't just about money, it was about fundamental rights and who had the authority to govern them.
But Parliament didn't exactly say, oh, our mistake, did they?
No. They eventually repealed the Stamp Act because of the pressure, but then, just 2 years later, 1767, they tried again with the Townshend Acts.
A different tactic this time.
Sort of. These were duties on imported goods, things like glass, lead, paint, paper, and importantly, tea. Britain tried to argue these were external taxes regulating trade, which they did have the right to do.
A lever, or so they thought. Did the colonists buy it?
Not really. They saw through it pretty quickly. Whether it was an internal stamp or an external duty, if the purpose was to raise revenue from them without their consent.
It was the same problem. Illegitimate in their eyes.
Precisely. It just deepened the suspicion that Britain was trying to chip away at their rights.
And speaking of tea, that leads us right to probably the most famous protests of all. 1773, the Boston Tea Party.
Oh, yeah. A truly dramatic moment. Our sources really paint a picture. Colonists, disguised as Mohawk Indians, boarding these ships in Boston Harbor and just heaving 342 chests of British tea overboard.
It sounds almost like theater, but the consequences were huge.
Absolutely. Financially, it was a massive blow to the British East India Company, which wasn't doing great anyway. But symbolically, wow.
A direct slap in the face to British authority.
Totally. A very public, very bold act of defiance. It basically said, we reject your right to tax us, period. The Crown was understandably stunned and furious.
And so Britain's response, not subtle.
Not at all. Swift and harsh. They hit back with what Parliament called the coercive acts.
But the colonists had a different name for them.
They sure did. The intolerable acts. And that name tells you everything about how they were received. These weren't just fines. They were designed to punish Massachusetts, especially Boston, and make an example of them.
What do they actually do?
Well, key things. They shut down Boston Harbor completely until the destroyed tea was paid for. Imagine the economic impact of that.
Devastating for a port city.
Exactly. They also drastically cut back the powers of self-government in Massachusetts, putting it much more under direct royal control, and maybe the most inflammatory part.
The Quartering Act.
Yes, allowing British troops to be housed in private homes, a constant visible symbol of occupation.
So the idea was to isolate Massachusetts, make the other colonies scared to step out of line.
That was the plan. But it backfired. Big time.
How so?
Instead of isolating Massachusetts, the intolerable acts actually unified the colonies. They saw it as an attack on all their rights. If Britain could do this to Massachusetts, they could do it to Virginia, to Pennsylvania.
It turned local grievances into a common cause.
Precisely. The fight shifted. It wasn't just about taxes anymore. It was about basic freedoms, about self-determination.
And while all this political drama is unfolding, there's something else happening, kind of in the background, but incredibly important.
The spread of ideas.
Exactly. These powerful Enlightenment ideas about liberty, natural rights, government by consent, they were really taking root.
This is crucial. The revolution wasn't just about reacting to British actions. It had its own intellectual engine. Thinkers like John Locke, his ideas about life, liberty, property, government needing the consent of the governed.
These provided the philosophical ammunition, right?
Yes, a framework for justifying resistance. And then you get something like Thomas Paine's Common Sense.
Which wasn't some dense academic text.
Not at all. It was a bestseller, written in plain, fiery language that everybody could understand. And its core argument was simple. It's absurd, it's against common sense, for a small island thousands of miles away to rule a vast continent.
It made the case for independence seem not just possible, but logical. Necessary, even.
It really did. You could argue the Enlightenment gave the revolution its soul, its intellectual justification.
Okay, so we've got years of resentment over taxes, these harsh, intolerable acts unifying the colonies, and powerful ideas justifying independence. It feels like a powder keg waiting for a spark.
And that spark comes in April 1775. Lexington and Concord.
British troops marching out from Boston.
Their mission was to seize colonial weapons and maybe arrest some key Patriot leaders in Concord. But colonial messengers like Paul Revere rode ahead to warn people.
So when the British got to Lexington Green very early in the morning, they found
a small group of colonial militia waiting for them, about 70 men, tense standoff.
And then the shot.
The shot heard round the world. To this day, nobody knows for sure who fired first. Was it a nervous militiaman, a jumpy British soldier?
Does it even matter who fired first?
In a way, no. What matters is that it happened. That shot broke the tension, shots were exchanged, militiamen died. The British pushed on to Concord, faced more resistance, and then had a harrowing march back to Boston under constant fire.
This was it then. Open warfare.
Yes. Lexington and Concord marked the point of no return. The talking was over. The American Revolutionary War had officially begun.
So wrapping this up, when we look back at what sparked the revolution, it's clear it wasn't just one thing.
Not at all. It was this confluence, this perfect storm of economic pressures, political clampdowns, evolving identity, powerful ideas.
It was fundamentally a struggle over identity, justice, and that basic right for people to determine their own future.
Yeah, and the impact went way beyond America. It challenged the whole idea of empire, of monarchy. It introduced new possibilities for government and freedom that echoed around the globe.
Its ripples are definitely still felt today.
Absolutely.
So maybe something for you to think about after this. How did these kinds of struggles for identity, for self-determination, keep repeating throughout history? And what can the start of the American Revolution teach us about, well, that deep human need for justice? And what happens when people band together because they feel their rights are being trampled?
A lot to consider there. Thanks for joining us on this journey today.
Stay curious, stay informed. We'll catch you on the next deep dive.